So I guess EWS got the bonus plan today, right? You're voluntold you have to sit through this actually in person while everybody else is just kind of hanging out, wearing whatever, being able to watch, right? Is that what it is? Well, good. Well, I sincerely appreciate the introduction today. Appreciate seeing some old friends, some very old friends sitting over there. You get to be our age, you got a lot of snow on the roof. It's good to see them around instead of the other potential. I also thought, when I got asked to do this, I'm like, wow, you must be really scraping the bottom of the barrel though, General Field, because you want a retired general officer to come here and speak? Just kidding though. I do feel very strongly about lifelong learning, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, a little bit about what I've been doing since I retired. Settled in my wife's hometown of Arvada, Colorado, just northwest of Denver. Wonderful place to be. Our daughters are nearby, twin daughters. One of our twin daughters just had twins, so my grandpa. And then her twin sister's having a baby on Valentine's Day. But of course, being in the wife's hometown, there's one aspect of that that isn't overly beneficial, and that would be the mother-in-law. Okay, raise your hand. How many people have the same impression? I refer to it as the monster-in-law. I'm just kidding you. Wonderful lady, but every once in a while we, smack heads a little bit. And one of the most constant sources of friction is the fact that I drive a Tesla Model S. It goes very fast. Now, I have nothing to do with the fact that it goes very fast, but it goes very fast. She doesn't always appreciate how fast that car goes. So, unlike I-95, we're out on the interstate and we're actually going full speed. She's sitting in the back seat, sniping away at how fast I'm driving. I don't think it's very fast. The car certainly doesn't think it's very fast. And, she's like, well, okay, one of these days, you're going to pay for that. Now, I got this piece of cake. Woo! Oh, okay. I get pulled over. I turn to my mother-in-law and say, please, I've got this. No comments from the cheap seats. She just gives me that smug little smile. Police officer comes walking up to my door. I roll the window down. Hello, officer, how you doing? And my mother-in-law from the back seat goes, officer, I am certainly glad you stopped him. As soon as he saw the lights, he finally put a seatbelt on, which we've never been able to get him to do. And I'm like, oh. Her name's Gladys. Thank you, Gladys. What can I do for you, officer? He's like, do you know how fast you were going? No, not really. He goes, you were doing about 80 miles an hour. Sure enough, from the back seat. Oh no, he was going much faster than that. Thank you, Gladys. Would you please shut up? And so the officer, being a very nice guy that he is, leans down and goes, ma'am, does he always talk to you like that? And her response, only when he's been drinking. Not a word of truth to that. I actually like my mother-in-law. We get along very, very well. But I figured you'd enjoy that story. But I'm here to talk to you about lifelong learning today. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. So I figured maybe talk about 20, 25 minutes. We'll do Q&A. I'll stay here as long as you want. I got nothing better to do. I'm retired, right? I'm just kidding. I would like to know, to me, the question and answer period is probably the most important piece of this because it tells me what you want to know. And I want to provide answers, if it's possible, to questions that you may have about lifelong learning. But what you're doing here right now, for those of you here and those that are out in video land, BTC land, or however we want to call it virtually, what you're doing right now is tremendously important. It's the education piece to education and training. And one of the most military historians that I've come across in all the reading and all the studying that I've done was Sir Michael Howard. And he said a number of things, but one of the things in particular he said that I thought was pretty important is the roots of victory and defeat often have to be sought far from the battlefield. He's talking about your time here. Every time you come back here. That education piece. And that lifelong learning piece, because to me, education is not just what happens here, where you have an instructor watching over you and making sure that you're doing the studying that you need to be doing. But maybe more important, because the times in between formal education are so few and far between, is that what you do on your own for personal professional development and lifelong learning. How much do you study your profession? How much do you study the changes going on around you? Because as some people have said in some of the reading that I've done, lifelong learning is becoming widely recognized as the most important competencies that people must possess. And what is lifelong learning? I'll define it for you. Learning that is continuous, collaborative, self-directed, active, broad in domain, everlasting, positive and fulfilling, and applicable to one's profession as well as all aspects of one's life. Does any of that not apply to anybody in here? Anybody else? You know, in the past, hard work, loyalty, dedication to the job, that was enough to get you by. 50 years and a gold watch on your retirement. That world doesn't exist anymore. One of my favorite authors is Thomas Friedman. And one of the things he said is there's no such thing as lifelong employment anymore. There's only lifelong employability. How good are you at keeping up with all the changes that are going on in this world? All the changes that impact your ability to do your job. The ability to engage in lifelong learning is the single most important competence that people must possess. How many of you think about that at all? How many of you have heard those kind of words before? That's how important this is. And I will tell you, even though I'm retired now, how important it continues to be for me. I finished on average 4 books a week, and I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that because I'm absolutely convinced I will never, ever be smart enough. I'm doing that to keep ahead of all the changes I see going on around me. I teach at the University of Colorado. I teach at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I have a couple other part-time jobs. My wife is like, well, you didn't really retire, did you? What am I supposed to do when I retire? Sit on the front porch and rock? There's lots to do in this world. Plenty of ways to stay engaged, and so that's what I'm doing. But we have a problem. And I'm talking American culture in particular. And for folks from the other countries, you know, maybe you have this problem, maybe you don't. But when we were young, and kids still are this way, intensely curious. Always want to know why. Always digging into things, taking things apart, put things back together, trying to figure things out. The intellectual curiosity is amazing to watch. Sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. How many have kids who ask why all the time? Anybody? Yeah, I see hands. All right. Enjoy every moment, because one of these days they leave. I'll tell you that part, okay? When does that stop? When do we lose that? Do we have any officers from India here? Maybe out in virtual land? One of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I was in India in the year 2000. They had a commercial. There's a really good-looking guy sitting in the back of a high school classroom with all the women kind of fawning on him, hanging on him, that kind of thing, the girls in the classroom, and the teacher's up front asking a very, very difficult question on the chalkboard. And he calls on that student to answer the question. And that student gets up, walks to the front of the room, answers the question, everybody's oohing and ahhing, clapping and stuff. He walks to the back of the room and sits down. That's what Indian culture values. What would that have been in an American context? The joker in the back of the room, the jock, who would have hid from even being picked in the first place, or if they'd been picked, would have made some smart-ass comment, and the instructor would have been like, okay, let's move on to somebody else. Is that what American culture values? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. I would also ask you, how many of you see yourselves as professionals? As a member of the profession of arms? And if you do see yourself as that, do you live up to the requirements of that profession? Not just when you're here at school, but always, with regards to studying your profession, training, getting better all the time. Because each one of us, when we raised our right hand, special trust and confidence was placed in us and our abilities to always live up to the demands of our profession, to be able to accomplish any task. That's how important this is, because that special trust and confidence piece, it's hard to develop and maintain over time. Very, very easy to lose. It can happen in a heartbeat, because professionalism is a very perishable skill. We always have to be working at it. And the importance of studying your profession and training and getting better is building competence. The more competence you have in your profession, the more confidence you will have in your performance as an officer. But there's an even more important aspect of that. As officers, especially as you get more senior, your ability to make decisions, good decisions, is incredibly important, which means you have to have judgment. Judgment comes from wisdom. And in my mind, knowledge plus experience, that experience piece is both actual experience, though you don't always get a choice in what experience you get, but maybe more importantly, vicarious experience, because you can always choose that, open a book. But the combination of those two gives you wisdom. Probably the best example of that, this isn't a complete lecture if you don't bring up Secretary Mattis. When he was commanding 1st Marine Division in combat, a reporter watched him make a really, really difficult decision in combat for a division, about 18,000 Marines and sailors, and marveled over it, asked him about it. Wow, that decision only took you about 30 seconds. He said, no. That decision took me 30 years. Okay, that's how important he sees it. To this day, he still sees it that way. So all of what I've said so far is probably pretty obvious, right? You would think? But what makes it so hard? I would ask you to think about your peers. I want to ask you to think about yourself. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But think about your peers. How many of them live up to that? How many of the leaders that you've seen ahead of you live up to that all the time? Because I would tell you the price of competence in our profession is filling body bags till you figure it out. That's not right. You got to have the competence before you go to combat. So some of the challenges, what makes it so hard? One of them is that anti-intellectualism I referred to earlier with regards to American culture. It can also be referred to as a fixed mindset. How many of you have heard the book called Mindset by Carol Dweck? Anybody? Strongly recommend it to you. Fixed mindset is, well, I'm about as smart as I'm ever going to get. That's it. Why study? I don't like to read. This is as good as it gets. Some of it is maybe a little laziness, but some of it also may be, you know what, I don't want people to actually discover that I'm nowhere near as smart as I think I am or as I say I am. That's a fixed mindset. That anti-intellectual piece can be overcome by something that Carol Dweck also talks about, which is the growth mindset, which is always willing to take on any challenge. I can always learn. I can always get smarter. Or maybe to have the attitude, because I like to think I have a growth mindset, is I will never be smart enough. I'm going to keep after it. That's how you overcome that kind of thing, growth mindset. So how do you instill that, not only in yourself, but maybe in your peers by setting the example, but more importantly in your subordinates? How do you get them to understand the same thing? Because there's a lot of that in our ranks, and it's all the services, and I suspect many different countries. Anti-intellectuals. Well, I left school when I joined the Marine Corps, or whatever service you're from, or whatever country you're from. I don't need to do that anymore. Study? I don't need to do that. That's that anti-intellectualism. And if you think about it, you've run into it already. Because another one is laziness, intellectual laziness. Just not wanting to get after these things. Accepting comfortable myths versus seeking the hard truths. There's a saying that I came across recently, I liked it a lot. It says, too often wisdom is ignored and ignorance is embraced. I think we see that on the news every day, don't we? Wisdom is ignored, ignorance is embraced. Okay, that's intellectual laziness, not getting after it. And of course, to overcome that, something as simple as one of the things I teach at the Naval Postgraduate School with my teaching partner, Dr. Mia Auger, is critical thinking. Digging in, always seeking the truth, no matter how inconvenient it is to, first of all, put in the effort, but second of all, confront yourself with something you may not be comfortable with. An inconvenient or uncomfortable truth. But it's having the self-discipline to get after that and to think critically and not taking everything at face value. How many of you feel like every time you go online, you've got that fire hose to the face with all the information coming at you? All the things being written all over the place. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? General Van Riper, Lieutenant General Van Riper, retired, Marine Corps retired. If you haven't come across him yet or his writings, he's phenomenal. One of the things he talked about is you can't be a sponge. There's just too much information out there. You need to be a filter. How do you develop your filter and figure out what's irrelevant and where are the grains of truth you can pick up? Where are the nuggets you can pick up and use? That's an effort that requires constant vigilance because there's just so much stuff out there. There's another thing I just came across recently. It's called truth decay or information disorder. I see some people nodding. You've come across that, right? Okay? Well, there's two parts to that. One is the active effort to distort the truth. I think some of our adversaries out there in this world do that a lot. And there are a lot of Americans that take that hook, line, and sinker because it's what they want to believe, regardless of the fact that it's nonsense. Okay? The lie. But then there's maybe the more pernicious piece is the myth. Well, such and such happens, this is why. Really? And you know that how? Digging into that. And that's not new. President Kennedy, in a commencement speech that he gave at Yale in 1962, said, "The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie. The deliberate, contrived, and dishonest lie. But it's the myth. Persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic." Think about that. You overcome that by being a healthy skeptic. If something sounds too good to be true, guess what? It's probably not true. But it takes an effort to dig into that. The blogosphere hasn't helped with that. There's something out there, in effect, people are calling the echo chamber, where you're only interacting online with people that think just like you do. So of course they're going to reinforce everything you're saying. Or if you're searching online for something, you can find anything you want. Anything you want online to back up what you think. But is it the truth? Is it realistic? That's what you've got to get after. Because there are people out there that are doing things that prevent us from being able to do our job. One of our previous commandants, General Miller, his biggest concern, we're going to have to fight to get to the next fight. How do you deploy if your young Marines, soldiers, airmen are getting bombarded by disinformation about what's going to happen when they leave, about what's happening to their bank accounts, what's happening to anything around them? How focused are they going to be on doing their job once you deploy, if you can even deploy? Okay? That is something you have to be more concerned about than I ever had to be over the course of my career. Food for thought. Of course, then you have asymmetric tactics and operations out there. Those who don't like us around the world have been watching us for the last 15 to 20 years. They know what we're good at, and they know what we suck at. Guess what they're going to focus on? What we suck at. Okay? Many times, I like to do this analogy of sports. Okay? Many times, I'm talking about America in particular, American forces in particular, we're preparing for American football. We're all suited up, we're warmed up, we're running our plays, practicing, we're all ready to go, while our opponents are out in the parking lot, dressed up playing the other version of football, otherwise known as soccer, scoring goal after goal and winning, and we can't figure out why. We have to have the ability to think outside the box. We have to have the ability to see what's going on and adjust accordingly. Again, Sir Michael Howard, he said we have an almost perfect track record at predicting the next fight. We get it wrong almost every single time. See, the important part is, though, to have the mental agility to adjust quickly once you get into that fight and realize it's not what you thought it was going to be. We have to be able to do that. Instead of typically what we have a tendency to do is drive a round peg into a square hole. There was a guy named Robert Comer, Ambassador Robert Comer, K-O-M-E-R. He served for the President Johnson administration for 2 years, 1966 and 1968. Then he went to Vietnam and ran the civilian portion of the counterinsurgency fight there for 2 years in Vietnam. His nickname was Blowtorch Bob, so you can kind of guess what his personality was like. But he wrote something you can find online at RAND called Bureaucracy Does Its Thing. I invite you to read it, but prepare to be frustrated. Because you read through that, and you think to yourself, you know what, damn it, we didn't learn a thing. Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't learn a thing. We made many of the same mistakes that were made in Vietnam, and we tossed it all aside. Is that going to happen again? It's not up to me. It's going to be up to all of you here. Are you going to allow that to happen? Another issue we have, ego and bias. Some people refer to that as victory disease. Why we would have victory disease, I don't know. But that ego and bias piece, yeah, we're better than them. Clearly, we can't learn anything here. Nothing to learn here. What kind of damage can that do? In 1905, the Russians and the Japanese fought a war, and everything that made World War I an absolute slaughter existed in that war. Fast-firing artillery, machine guns, and barbed wire, to keep it simple. All the major powers sent observers, to include one minor power, the United States, because that's what we were at the time. We sent observers to go watch. What do you think we learned out of that experience? Zip. August 1914, World War I started. Everybody thought it'd be a quick fight. Absolute slaughter. July 1st, 1916, almost 2 years into the war, the British launched an offensive on the Somme. Think about this for a second. 60,000 casualties in one day. 20,000 were dead. Fast-firing artillery, barbed wire, machine guns. Spring of 1917, the French launched yet another offensive called the Novella offensive. Disaster. Almost the entire French army mutinied because of the stupidity of their generals. Some of them mutinied to the point where they killed their officers. Most of them just said, you know what, we're not going to attack anymore. We will defend, we will not attack anymore. We're done with this. That's how bad that got. And a guy named Pétain, Marshal Pétain, saved the French army in 1917. So April of 1917, the United States finally decides to enter the war. We were so unprepared we didn't start fighting until March of 1918, March, April, May of 1918, when we really started getting the heavy fighting. How much do you think we learned from the British and the French experiences up until that time, from almost 3 years of war? Nothing. Nothing at all. Between May and November of 1918, when we did most of our fighting, we had over 100,000 killed. Just Americans. Think about that. Fast-firing artillery, machine guns, and barbed wire. That's the cost of not keeping up with technical challenges in our profession and not thinking outside the box. Not thinking, okay, how could this change? How could we do this differently? 1916. Challenges of the future are unclear. We have to continually outthink any opponent we have. And some people think we're already at war. It's just not a shooting war with some of our opponents around the world, because they're already taking steps to get what they want, which is the essence of conflict. It's opposing human wills, getting what you want. They're doing it by, they call it the gray zone, salami slicing, keeping things just short of where we'll actually react to it. They're getting what they want. What are we going to do about it? Well, not we. I'm retired now. I get to watch you. What are you going to do about it? Again, none of this is new. Okay? There was a guy named Alfred North Whitehead, eminent educator in the early 1900s. And this is what he said in 1916 in a book called The Aims of Education. The first 2/3 of it are actually very, very good. Then it gets a little weird. This is one of his quotes from that, which I found fascinating. In the conditions of modern life, this rule is absolute. The race which does not value trained intelligence is doomed. Not all your heroism, not all your social charm, not all your wit, not all your victories on land or sea can move back the finger of fate. Today we maintain ourselves. Tomorrow science will have moved forward yet one more step, and there will be no appeal from the judgment which will be pronounced on the uneducated. He said that in 1916. How much more valid is that today than it was in 1916? Just think about that. Now, this isn't something folks at the captain's rank think about a lot. I certainly did when I was a captain. But some of you are going to go on to high rank. And when you get there, you're going to be faced with incredibly challenging, complex problems. You'll have people around you that can help you, but for the most part, you're going to be the most knowledgeable and experienced person there. And all you're going to have is what you brought in the door with you when you got to that job, from the training and the education you've done over the course of your career. And I tell you, if you haven't done much up until that point, you certainly aren't going to have time to catch up at that point because things get too busy. So how are you going to react to that? Because some people arrive fully prepared to be there and are absolutely astounding. And I think you can all think of names of people that come to your mind immediately who just were faced with incredibly complex problems and knocked it out of the park. And some get to that and they find themselves way out of their depth. And they fall on their face, sometimes in a very public manner. Two examples, one positive, one negative. First is Abraham Lincoln. Depending on what historian you read, he got maybe 1 to 2 years of formal education in the course of his life. But he read voraciously. He read so much his dad harassed him that he wasn't doing the farm chores because he was spending too much time reading. Read voraciously, preparing himself for what? Who knows? He was out in Illinois, in the prairies. What was he going to do in his life? He didn't know. But constantly studying, constantly getting better, became a lawyer on his own volition, working with one of the local lawyers, developed himself, and then ended up through various set of steps running for the President of the United States and winning. And that was faced with the absolute worst situation any American president has ever been faced with. Upon his election, states in the southern part of the United States started leaving the Union, saying, we're done with this. Yeah, we're not doing this anymore. His predecessor in office, because back then, elections were held in November like they are now, but they didn't get inaugurated till March. So he had to sit from November to March and watch his predecessor let him go. Yeah, leave him alone. Don't do anything. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, you know what? We're not going to bother. Not my business. Let him go. When he was inaugurated, immediately got hit with something called Fort Sumter. They're running out of food in Fort Sumter, a northern fort in Charleston, South Carolina. They're running out of food. We don't know what to do about it. First week in office. Okay? He had one general after another because the American army was not prepared to fight. And to make matters worse, many of the most senior leaders of that army left and went south. He went through 7 generals from 1861 to 1864 before he finally found one who understood what Liggett wanted and needed, which was destroy the Southern Army. 7 generals, one after another, some with disastrous defeats. Lincoln knew, and he kept telling him. You can see it in the things he was saying, see it in the things he was writing. He even wrote to one of those generals who'd been bragging that, hey, what this country needs is a dictatorship. He even said, look, I'll take the risk of dictatorship if you just win, please. Which, of course, he didn't. And he persevered all the way through to 1865 when he finally won. And, of course, didn't get a chance to enjoy it because 5 days after the Army of Northern Virginia, which was the main Confederate Army, 5 days after they surrendered, he was assassinated at Ford's Theater, just up the street. Negative example. General William Westmoreland. There's 2 books written by a retired Army colonel named Lewis Sorley. One of them is called Westmoreland, The Man Who Lost the War. Anybody want to read a book or have a book named after you like that? The Man or Woman Who Lost the War? Okay. He was in charge of Vietnam for 4 years. Commissioned in 1936 out of the Naval Academy. By 1945, he was a full bird colonel in charge of an artillery regiment at the end of World War II. In the 50s, he was offered the chance to go to professional military education. And his answer was, I don't need to go there. I'll go there to teach if you want, but I don't need to go there as a student. Didn't study. And when he got to Vietnam, he was faced with an incredibly complex problem and could not find a solution. He worked very hard. He tried. I just don't think he was mentally prepared to be there. 4 years. The second book is called A Better War, and it's about Creighton Abrams, who took over from General Westmoreland. He was his deputy for about 1 to 2 years and then took over for him in the last couple of years of our involvement there. He knew what needed to be done. He started taking steps, and we were actually doing fairly well towards the end of that conflict, but the American people had said, you know what, we're done, forget it, pull the plug, we're out of there. Whose fault is that? It's military's. It's a profession of arms. That's our responsibility to get that right. Not taking anything away from the fact of how difficult it was. It was tremendously challenging and difficult. We don't have a choice. We've got to figure it out. So I would ask you, every day, assess yourself. Are you getting smarter? Or are you just treading water, barely keeping up with what's going on around you? Or not? The world around you is constantly changing. And it's getting more challenging. You probably see that more than I do. We no longer can count on having a technological edge in any fight we're going to get in from here on out. We can only count on an intellectual edge, which means we are smarter, we can outthink anybody that come across. But that is a constant effort to be that way. That's what the price of this is. And one of the reasons why I read as much as I did on active duty and still do, because I believe that's putting tools in my mental tool chest. I don't know what problems I'm going to be dealing with from here on out. You don't know what problems you're going to be dealing with from here on out in the rest of your career, however long that is. So the more tools you have in your tool chest, from learning from what other people have done well or not so well, learn from other people's mistakes. Don't learn the hard way and run into a brick wall on your own. The Japanese have a concept called Kaizen. Constant improvement. Avoiding complacency. Constantly climbing. Having the attitude, I'll never be smart enough. Very admirable concept. Last couple things I'll tell you is, your time here is your services or your country's investment in you. Think about what it takes to send you and your family here to school, in residence. Many of your peers are doing, and some of you have probably done, the non-resident courses. Demanding, but you're doing it in addition to your job. You have no other job here. Your only job is to study, get smarter, get better every day. And your instructors are handpicked to make sure that happens. So if you haven't thanked your instructor recently, please do. Okay? Because they've got a tough job. They've got to make sure you're the best you could possibly be, because when you're done here, you're going to go back out to your service, your country, whatever it is, and you're going to be expected to take on anything that comes at you. And there's some really weird things out there. Things you can't even begin to anticipate. Summer 1994, I was a company commander, came out of the Advanced Artillery Officer course. I was the token grunt, the Advanced Artillery Officer course, I don't know why, in Lawton, Oklahoma. Okay, so I went to that course. We're training, and in May, Memorial Day weekend, we get deployed to go deal with Haitian migrants. Bizarre. To make it more bizarre, they took the hospital ship Comfort, took all the medical folks off it, put INS agents on it, put one rifle company on that for security, put my rifle company on a Ukrainian cruise ship. Of course, it had been a former Soviet troop ship, so it wasn't a very nice ship. Okay? And we went down to Kingston Harbor, Jamaica. The Coast Guard would pick them up from their little boats. They'd bring them to the Comfort for processing for INS. And then the ones that were getting sent back to Haiti, which is about 98% of them, came over to me for holding until the Coast Guard take them back. And you can imagine how happy they were to come over to me, to our company. Okay? Where's that covered? And just when we thought that was dying down, we went down, we had to move to Cuba because so many Haitians had come out, we couldn't handle them on shipboard anymore. Just when that started dying off, the Cubans came out about 3 times the number. Whole summer long. That could happen again today, because all the conditions that existed then still exist right now. Could happen again today. Are you prepared for it? My battalion commander was a guy named General John Allen, lieutenant colonel at the time. Some of you may have heard of him, phenomenal guy. To prepare us for going down there, he hands us some printouts from how the Koreans, how POWs were handled in Korea, or not handled well, in Korea, on the islands of the periphery of Korea. And it was amazing reading that, because in one case, a camp commander was trying to negotiate with a huge crowd of Korean and Chinese prisoners, and they dragged him in and took him prisoner, took him hostage. And that struck me, because at one point, about 30,000 Cubans broke out of their camps and were marching on Main Side, and General Allen was standing there in front of a crowd of them, trying to talk to them. I remember very specifically, because I was standing about 20 feet behind him with my hand on my pistol, looking at him going, yeah, go ahead and try it. Go ahead. And they were looking at me instead of him, but that's what was going through my head. That's not happening. But again, only reason I thought about that was because of the reading he took the time to compile and give to us as we're heading out the door on short notice. That's how important these things are. Not only is it your own study, but it's your subordinate study. Setting the example for them, but then how are you going to encourage them? Because there's 2 types of motivation. There's extrinsic motivation, which means you're doing it because I told you to do it. How motivating is that? Because the other aspect is an intrinsic motivation. How do you inspire them to get after it on their own? That's going to be your job, if it hasn't been already. How do you inspire them? Because all of us have to get smarter. Some people think, well, officers make all the decisions. Nope. Okay, officers and staff COs make all, nope. All right, well, NCOs, staff NCOs, and officers make all the decisions. Nope. I got 3 combat tours under my belt. I watched Lance Corporals make absolutely eye-watering decisions like that. Wow, holy smokes. Simply amazing. And it's only going to get worse, because now we had a little bit of it then, now we have cameras everywhere. And cameras don't tell you all the things that are going wrong around you. They don't say that it's 130 degrees. You haven't slept in 2 days, and you're making a split-second decision, and oh, by the way, you're 19 years old. Cameras don't cover those kind of things. But you know what? Our young Americans have a tendency to get it right. That's who you're leading. Huge obligation. A lot of special trust and confidence. Earn it every day. I thank you for your time and attention. I will open it up for questions right now. And I don't know if I'll have a chance to tell you this afterwards, but I wish you the best of luck. And I hope you have a great Christmas break, because I think I'm the only thing between you and Christmas break, right? Is everybody heading right out? No, I'm just kidding.